He said, Joel, you're the worst salesman I've ever seen, and you have the worst attitude of anybody I've ever met, and you'll never make it dealing with people. Now, if
I'm
that
gonna
was you, if somebody said that to you at the height of making your first sale, and then he's telling you the worst salesman that he's ever hired in 22, but he added one word. And as you're listening, this word is powerful for you. He said, you're the worst salesperson I've ever hired, and you'll never make it dealing with people. And he paused, and then he said, unless you change the way you think about yourself.
My next guest is somebody who has had a significant influence on my life in a very short period of time. And his name is Joel Weldon. He's my speaking coach. And I'm going to read his introduction to you. You're here because high performance is one of your mindsets. You're already good at what you do, and you know there's still more that you can do on your journey, both personally and professionally. One of the most famous performers in the world of business and finance is Warren Buffett. He is ranked as the #1 investor of all times and is now one of the world's richest men. Warren said, you can improve your value by 50% just by learning communication skills and public speaking. That's why I wanted you to meet our special guest, Joel Weldon. Joel is a Hall of Fame professional speaker. He is the creator of the ultimate speaking system for entrepreneurs and business owners, as well as executives to speak even more effectively. If you rated yourself using a 1 to 10 scale on your ability to speak in front of a group made up of your ideal audience members, what would that number be right now? It can be anywhere from 1, which would mean I'm terrified to speak and I hate it, to 10, which would be I love to speak and I'm amazing at it. Wherever you are on that scale, the mindset that Joel is going to share with you can help you be an even better speaker and communicator. Joel has been paid to speak at over 3,000 events and has personally coached well over 10,000 speakers. I have seen how he can turn an ordinary presentation into an extraordinary one. You will too. Please help me welcome my coach, my friend, and hopefully the man who's going to help you be an even better speaker. Welcome to the podcast, Joel.
Thank you, Matt. And so good that you're here as a listener.
Thank you. This feels a little bit like a music student in front of their music coach. So I have to admit that I'm a little more nervous with you than I have been with some of my other guests because you've been helping and coaching me for an upcoming speech that I'm doing. But it's really wonderful to have you on the podcast. Our listeners are curious about how they can improve their speaking. Let's go back a few years and tell me, how did you get into this?
That's a great question. So as you're listening, just think about your own experience. Now, you can tell by looking at me, I've been around a long time, much longer than you. I mean, I'm so old, my social security number's 5. So yes, the beginning goes back a long time. So wherever you are in your career, let's use that 1 to 10 that Matt opened with when he asked you to rate yourself when it comes to your speaking skills. 1, you're terrified. 10, you just love to do it. Let's use that same 1 to 10 on your career as an entrepreneur. So the first question would be, where are you on that journey? 1, you just began today and you started your own business. 10, you've been doing it for years. You're making a ton of money. You're one of the rich people that could be on this podcast, and you love what you do and you're helping other people. And that would be a 10. So where are you? Are you a 6, a 7, an 8, a 9, a 4? It doesn't matter where you are now. What really matters as you're listening, where are you going to end up? Because life is a journey. So I'm 83 years old. I'm going to be 84 in 6 months. But I'm still working full time. I'm an avid water skier. I do a lot of physical things, same things I was doing in my 40s and 50s. But I know that I'm much older than you are. So maybe I can bring you a perspective to put your life and your career as an entrepreneur into perspective by some of the things that have happened in my life. So the basic premise is it's not where you start, it's where you end up. It's not where you are now, it's where you can go. And obviously you're interested in self-improvement, or you wouldn't be listening to this podcast and being one of Matt's followers and the people that he's interviewing. And Matt, that's a wonderful title, that I see rich people. Now, did that come from that wonderful movie with Bruce Willis about I see dead people?
That's really funny that you got that. So I was on a book writing thing with Jack Canfield, and that was like on a Thursday and Friday. In the middle of the night, I got this idea that woke me up out of my sleep, and it said, I see rich people. And I wrote it down. And that morning, Jack said, has anybody had any insight or aha moments? And so that idea came to me. And yes, it is a play, I think, a little bit on the Sixth Sense movie. I used to see dead people as a paramedic, but now in this next chapter of my life, I'm seeing rich people.
That's good. So as you're listening, hopefully that's where you want to be. You might already be rich, but rich is really an interesting word. Does it have to do with how much money you have? And I'm sure people in your family, your centers of influence that have a lot of assets, which means they have homes and cars and boats, but they don't have $2,000 cash. They've got everything invested in something, and they have maybe a lot of net worth, but they don't have riches where they could do anything they wanted to. And then you know people that maybe don't have a lot of money, but are rich in the relationships they have, or the friends that they have, or the contribution they make in their community. And of course, Matt, your whole profession, helping people become paramedics and saving lives, is such an important thing. And that attracts a different kind of person. It attracts a giver. And one of my son-in-laws, John Laughlin, is deputy fire chief in Mesa, Arizona. And he's been a paramedic. 25 years ago, he got his paramedics, I guess, degree or license. And his whole life is really helping other people. So you're in that business of helping people. So this podcast is to help you as you're listening, take the experiences you have, learn from them, and then use the experiences of others. So there's OPE and YPE. YPE is your personal experiences. OPE is other people's experiences. So Matt asked me, how did I become an entrepreneur? How did I get started? It certainly wasn't what you would think, because normally when somebody is a professional speaker, somebody thinks then you must have been like valedictorian in high school class, or you were on the debating team, or maybe you went in school plays. And none of that is true. Because being an effective speaker, and this is important for you, is a learned skill. It is not a natural talent. People are not born knowing how to be an effective speaker. Just like when you typed your last email, if you used 10 fingers, you didn't get born knowing how to type. You took a course in typing and you learned how to type. It's a learned skill. If you play golf or tennis or pickleball, you aren't a great athlete to start with, but you learned how. Maybe sure you had athletic ability, you were better coordinated, or you were fast, or you had eye-hand coordination or muscle memory. That might have helped you, but the skills you learn are something you learn. So anything you need to know about being a successful entrepreneur, you can learn. Now, granted, some people might have a better hang of it, or just because of that natural ability, and they might exceed what you're doing in that area, but you're going to exceed in other areas. And this is something I didn't learn in my own life until I was much older, because when I was born in 1941, World War II had just started. And growing up in that kind of environment as a little kid, I don't remember anything, but I do remember that you got a job, you went to work for somebody. Then when you got to be in your 60 or 65 age, you retired, and then you sat on the beach or played golf somewhere. And that was it. There was no books on success, really. The first major accomplishment was in 1956, when Earl Nightingale recorded The Strangest Secret. And that one record, and it was actually a record that sold for $10, became the largest selling recording in the history of the recording industry of a spoken word message. And that ignited the lives of many people, me being one of them. And everything that's happened since the day I heard that one message called The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale, nothing was ever the same again in my life. The same thing can happen for you. One experience, one speaker, one book, one contact with somebody sitting next to you on an airplane could completely change the direction of your life. But the one that Earl Nightingale put out affected millions of people. And basically, the strangest secret is that you become what you think about. Now, just take that one statement. What did you think about this morning? Did you think about what a wonderful day this was going to be and how you're going to help people and how you're going to generate income and how you can have this wonderful life as an entrepreneur? Or did you think of the other things that I'm not feeling that well, or I'm behind on this, or I hope this is going to happen because I sure got to make a sale, or whatever that is? And if you just kept it simple, positive and negative, what are your thoughts? If you had to put a line down the middle, it's a positive thought or a negative thought. What if you controlled your thinking? What if you only thought about the positive things? Now, that doesn't mean bad things aren't going to happen to you, but it's how you respond. And I forget who said this. It's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to it. And that's a powerful thought to think of. So how about, Matt, since you're really the only active listener here, aside from the people that you have that follow your podcast, how about any questions, comments, and thoughts about what I said so far, or what somebody might be thinking as they're listening?
I think this is all really great. I want to take the listeners back to where you were. What prompted you to listen to Earl Nightingale's record before, and then what did you do afterward?
This would be something to think of in your own experience. As you're listening, what was one of the first dominoes in your life? And I think you've probably seen on television or on YouTube dominoes, thousands of them. I think the record is 20 million that some kids at a university put together, and they line them up in intricate format, and then they tip the first one over, and then they all fall in sequence. That's called the domino effect. So think about who was the first domino in your life. And that's who Earl Nightingale was for me. So here's the backstory that you're asking about what happened. So just imagine as you're listening, you're in high school and you're so shy, you don't give an oral report. As a matter of fact, you're so afraid of standing up in front of a group, you never give an oral report in 4 years of high school. Take a failing grade rather than speak in front of a group. You don't have a lot of friends because you're shy and self-conscious. That was what I was like. In 1959, graduating from Far Rockaway High School in Queens, New York, I was in the bottom quarter of my high school class. I had no interest in school. I didn't do very well. Nothing was interesting or got me engaged. And I had no confidence. 3 coaches on the swimming, basketball, and baseball team asked me to try out watching me in PE for the team, and I never went for a tryout because I didn't think I was good enough. Have you ever had that experience where somebody gives you an opportunity and you turn it down because you don't think you're good enough? And that's an important thing as you're listening to these ideas. That's my background. So after getting out of high school, turning down a college scholarship that I got at the Inwood Country Club, and I was caddying, Matt, from the time I was 14 through 19 at the Inwood Country Club for rich people. Maybe they would be the ones that could be on your podcast.
Maybe.
And in 1959, the caddy master, Pepe, called me into the caddy shack and he said, "Joel, I got great news. You're caddy of the year. The members liked you and they voted you caddy of the year." I said, "Well, that's nice." He said, "Do you know what that means?" I said, "No." He said, "It means we give you a 4-year college education. Any college you can get to, we're going to pay room, board, and tuition."
Wow.
Compliments of the Inwood Country Club. What do you think of that opportunity? I was raised by a single mom, no brothers and sisters. I went home and told her, and I told her I couldn't go to college. I'm not smart enough. So I turned it down. Now, if that happened to you, if somebody offered you a college scholarship, everything paid for, would you have taken it? I didn't. That's the mindset that I had. I didn't think I was smart enough to go to college. So I became a carpenter in the construction industry. And from out of high school until I was 26 years old, I was banging nails, digging ditches, working in construction, making $62.50 a week with hard labor. And then the first domino appeared. So maybe I should change. It wasn't Earl. The first domino was a man named Vernon Cavell. He was in our church. And Matt, you could appreciate this because you deal with so many people. And he was a lot like you. He was a very kind, gentle soul, very smart. And he said, Joel, do you know what I do? And he said, I sell World Book encyclopedias. And I'm looking for people just like you. Now, can you imagine what I thought of this company if they were looking for people like me? I had no confidence. I couldn't talk to people. I was shy. It doesn't sound like that's the career of an entrepreneur or a Hall of Fame professional speaker.
Not
But
at
he
all.
made it sound so interesting because he said this word, and I know you know what it is. He said, we pay you a commission. And Matt, I said to Mr. Cavell, I said, what is a commission? He said, we pay you what you're worth. If you sell something, you get paid. If you don't sell something, you don't get paid. I didn't like that right away, but he made it sound so good. I quit my job as a carpenter, became a World Book encyclopedia salesperson door to door. Now let's stop. This was in 1967 when people went door to door selling things. As you're listening, when was the last person to come to your door to sell you something? A vacuum cleaner, a set of books, a subscription to a magazine? Probably not. Maybe the only person that knocked on your door recently was maybe somebody doing a roof in the neighborhood, say we're around the corner, or a painter that we're painting a house down the block. Would you be interested in the price? But door-to-door salespersons in the 60s, 70s, and 80s were common things. But now people wouldn't even open the door for a stranger. So that's kind of the background. And then I don't want to brag, but I set a company record in the first 4 months with no experience, shy, self-conscious. I made 1,200 sales calls and only one sale in 4 months. Nobody had ever spent that long and never sold it. Somebody told me later, you could have sent a dog out with an order form and he could have come back with more sales than you did. And I went to this, you like a story, Matt. So just imagine you were my invisible partner. This is on Long Island, New York, Bayshore, Long Island, knocking on a door, and in the front yard are all of these bikes and toys, obviously a lot of kids. And it said the Dunn family. And it was a Catholic neighborhood. And I figured that they were Catholic with all of those kids. And I knocked on the door, and this lady opens it wearing an apron, been in the kitchen. And this is how I looked. And here was my approach. Are you ready for this? And she said, yes, what do you want? You don't want to buy any books, do you? That was my approach. Well, no wonder I had 1,200 rejections. And they would say, no, we don't want to buy. And they'd slam the door. But Mrs. Irene Dunn on that day said, young man, we love and cherish books in this house. What books are you selling? And I said, the World Book Encyclopedia. She said, World Book. Now, as I'm telling you this story, I can still picture her smiling, and she was so happy. I said, are you familiar? She said, yes, I've wanted to buy it for years. Come in, I'll give you a check. I've got to get them right away. So can you imagine, Matt, if that was you, how would you have felt? 4 months knocking on doors, nobody's interested. Now this lady wants to give you a check and you're standing outside. You haven't even told her about the books yet, but she knew about them. So she said, sit down in the kitchen, I'll get my checkbook. She comes back and she sits down next to me. She said, how much do I make the check out for? And I said, I don't know. Nobody's ever asked me that before. Could I borrow your telephone and call the office? And that's what I did. I had to call the office, find out the price of the book, which was $189. And she wrote out a check to Field Enterprises. And I went in so excited to the office and showed Mr. Cavell, the man who had hired me 4 months earlier, my first sale. He was so excited. He hugged me. He had everybody clap. And then he said, tell me what happened. So I told him what I just told you. He said, so you didn't make a presentation. You didn't even open the prospectus. You didn't give any trial closes. You didn't overcome objections. You didn't show value? She just gave you a check. I said, yes. He said, Joel, you're the worst salesman I've ever seen, and you have the worst attitude of anybody I've ever met, and you'll never make it dealing with people. Now, if that was you, if somebody said that to you at the height of making your first sale, and then he's telling you the worst salesman that he's ever hired in 22, but he added one word. And as you're listening, this word is powerful for you. He said, you're the worst salesperson I've ever hired, and you'll never make it dealing with people. And he paused, and then he said, unless you change the way you think about yourself. And I could still hear those words now, decades later. And I said, how do you do that? He said, maybe this record will help you. And he opened his desk drawer mat and he pulled out a copy of, and I just have it here, The Strangest Secret. You can see it's pretty beat up. And it's this little tiny record. And I said, I don't dance. He said, no, it's not a dancing record. It's a talking record. I don't want you to take this home and listen to it. And I had married this wonderful woman, Judy, and he said, and he knew her name, and he said, I want you to listen to this with Judy tonight and see if this can help you. So Vernon was the first domino who got me into a sales job. The second domino was that night, listening to The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale. And I never left the house for the next week. I just listened to the record over and over again. And Judy and I talked about goals and attitude and what we were thinking about. And then I thought about, what if I had books like that? The books were wonderful. They were interesting. They were fun. They were colorful. It wasn't like some Encyclopedia Britannica, which was all facts and statistics. It was made for kids to make it interesting to learn. And as I got into those books, I realized if my mother, as poor as we were, had seen that, she would have bought them. As much as it was, she would have paid for them. Maybe it would have made a difference. So I thought about that. So Judy and I talked about it. And by the way, Judy and I were married for 59 years with a wonderful family and relationship. And she passed on just a couple of years ago, but we had 63 years together, 4 years of dating and 59 years of marriage. So when we heard that together, I decided I was going to learn how to sell those books, and then I was going to get a real job. And I went out the next day. Now, picture this as you're listening. You've had 4 months of rejection. You've had one sale out of over 1,200 sales calls. You never really made the sale. They just gave you the money. You've had your boss tell you have the worst attitude and the worst selling ability of anybody he's ever met in over 2 decades. And now you got the same product in the same territory at the same price. What would happen? So that first day, Matt, I made 4 sales calls, 2 sales, and I doubled 4 months of activity in 4 hours. I doubled in 4 hours what it had taken 4 months to achieve. And I had an old beat up Volkswagen. And imagine as you're listening, you're sitting in that Volkswagen with me, and we pulled that rear view mirror down and had a crack in it. And I said, I did it. I did it. What did I do? A different attitude, a different mindset. And that was the next domino. At that moment, I realized that Earl was right, that we become what we think about. I wasn't thinking about making a sale. I was thinking about those kids in this family and how these books could help them. So fast forward to the end of that first year, Matt.
I'm going to pause you right there.
Sure, stop.
That's a great story. There's so much to unpack there. I'm going to ask a couple questions, and then the great thing about stories is they connect us, right? And so we're all probably leaning forward, listening to you tell this story. Did they offer any sort of training?
Yes, I had. When I left carpentry, I went to a 1.5-day training that taught me everything about sales, selling the product, very extensive but not the, I mean, you trained people for what, 16 months? Yes. I was trained maybe in 6 hours.
Did they
No
have
training.
did they have a preceptor or somebody who shadowed you and showed
No,
you the ropes?
no, it was Mr. Cabell was my friend from church and he was the boss. He didn't go out in the field. So I was just kind of left alone. And unfortunately, later I learned that most of the people that sold World Book were school teachers. And they would call on the kids in their class or the people in their school. And it wasn't a high pressure sale. There was no gimmicks. It was a very reputable company. Nothing was free. It was $10 down and $10 a month that most mothers could afford for their kids. And they were school teachers. I was an anomaly coming out with no education, didn't go to college, and a carpenter.
I
Well,
think
what
that's so
happened?
instructive for all of our listeners. To most of us have employees, but do we have a training program? Do we have somebody for them to shadow? And then are we checking in occasionally to make sure that they're doing what they are supposed to be doing? Because I don't want another Joel Weldon out there, 1,200 sales or attempts with only one connection. So that's really great.
So, based on that experience, now the first year ends. Counting the first 4 months, I was the number one salesperson out of over 1,100 school teachers that worked for Mr. Capel. It was a huge organization. I was selling everyone. I wasn't a very good salesperson, but I was so convinced how good those books would be for this family. And I worked on referrals. Mrs. Irene Dunn, that very first person, when I went back to show her kids how to use the books, which was part of the plan, that you'd go back once the books arrived, which took 3 weeks, and you'd sit down with the kids and show them how to use them. She said, "You got to see my sister because she needs them too. She's got 6 kids like I do." And I went to see Mrs. Dunn's sister, and she ordered World Book. And she said, "Why are you here? See my neighbor." I went there. So I was selling literally everybody on referrals. And that built a very successful career. I wasn't rich, but I was sure making a lot more than 62.50 a week, which was like about $3,400 a year. I mean, that's for hard labor for a whole year. How
So
is that
you
possible?
you reframed it into what the benefit was for the customer. But did you do anything else internally? Did you start thinking that I'm valuable, that I'm useful? Was there anything else?
Yes, that's part of what the strangest secret was, that our self-image was so important and our mindset and our attitude. And I think I might have known some of these things deep down, but I didn't have anybody to articulate it. There were no books, there were no courses. There wasn't a Tony Robbins telling you that you can achieve great things. None of that existed. Earl Nightingale started the whole industry of learning by listening. And then people started putting material out on records, then eventually cassette tapes, then eventually on CDs. And now, of course, everything is digitized and we've got YouTube out there. So much of that is available. But as you're listening, I think the most important thing to think of is don't worry where you are now. You can learn the rest. And based on that, I got so scared because I was moving so quick in the organization because I was hiring and training people, teaching them what I had learned. And I bought the Strangest Secret records to give everybody that I hired. These were school teachers and they didn't know anything about selling, but I reminded them how wonderful the books were. That's why they were in almost every classroom. But remember, we didn't have the internet then. If you had kids and you had to do a report on China, you'd have to go to the public library. Somebody didn't have to drive you there. You didn't drive if you were a kid. So it wasn't anywhere like our world today, where our phone gives us access to everything. And I have AI on here, use it every single day. Imagine if you had AI back in the 60s, what that could have done to change our whole society. So things change and you have to adapt to those changes. So
So I
that's
can
the first lesson for you, is to think that you become what you think about. What are you thinking about every day? And not that you ignore the negatives or the problems, but it's how you respond to them. Things don't happen to you, they happen for you. What can you do with this challenge? How do you turn this to your advantage? You know, that old, how do you make lemonade out of lemons? It's the same lemon. It's that mindset that you bring that can change those things. And I'm living proof of that.
And I can attest after working with you that you are one of the most positive people I have ever met. Your idea that make today great or make it a great day,
Make
you
it a
know,
great
say it at the end of every text and every email. It's very impressive. So
Well,
that
let me have that with your listener. How many times have you been with somebody, maybe a client, maybe a fellow team member working with you, and at the end of the day, okay, have a nice day, have a good day. The word have means it's circumstantial. It's what's going to occur that's going to determine what kind of day you got. But when you say to somebody, make it a great day, it has nothing to do with the weather. It has nothing to do with people. It has nothing to do with the economy, what the president of the United States is doing, what your neighbor's doing. It's up to you. So when you use that, just that one word instead of have, make it a great day. If you have children, if you say that to your kids, it's not the school bus driver, it's not the teachers, it's not your classmates, it's you. Your life is your choice. So make it a great day. And it's just that simple mindset. Today, in this technical world that we live in, people try to make things too complicated. It's really very simple. Earl said it in 1956. You become what you think about. So, what are you thinking about today? What are you going to think about tomorrow? Are you watching the news and watching all the tragedies and problems? Or are you listening to a podcast like this about rich people?
Yeah, I want to point out something because part of what we're trying to do is educate the audience on skills. And you're doing something that if you've never seen it before, might just absolutely slip on by. And it's something that I do with my students. And so it's great to see you do it. And I call it the Socratic method. And it's the asking the question, how many of you have done this? Or if I'm teaching cardiology, what do you know about sinus rhythms? And when you ask a question of your audience, it clicks them into gear versus just this kind of passive listening. It becomes an active listening skill. So this is something that if you're watching Joel, don't just listen to his stories, you're getting lessons from a master. So let's fast forward a little bit and let's go to the idea that you were a great public speaker after this. Is that right?
No, I could barely talk to any group of people, and I was terrified. I got good at one-on-one talking to a mother in home about her kids, but in front of a group, no. So if you want to come back in time, I started to say I got scared. I was making more money than I ever thought was possible. And I'm talking about like $10,000 a year. I mean,
That's
I
good.
wasn't rolling in money, but in this panic of moving so fast, Judy and I decided to move to Arizona from New York. And we moved to Arizona. We started back with World Book, brand new. And when I got here, they gave me 17 school teachers to have in my little group as a district manager, they called it. And on September 4th, 1969, I had a meeting in Tempe, Arizona at the Holiday Inn with the 17 people. The first time I ever stood up in front of a group and talked. Doing World Book for 2 years. This is my first meeting ever as a district manager in a new territory. And I was terrified and nervous. And then I'm sure you can remember the first time you spoke. And as you're listening, the first time maybe you got up in front of a group, it probably wasn't very good. So finally it was over. I'm packing up my stuff and the door opens and an older gentleman who was one of the 17 people came in. He was a school principal. And he said, young man, would you like some feedback on the meeting you just did? What would you have said, Matt?
Sure.
I said, yeah. He said, this was the worst meeting I've ever been to in my whole life. And young man, you're the worst speaker I have ever heard in my entire life. And I've heard a lot of them. And you're the worst. Now, let's see, this was 69. So I was 28 years old and I started to cry.
Yeah.
I felt so, I just burst into tears. And he yelled at me, he said, stop crying. You're not a baby. You're a man. And I'm going to fix you. I said, what do you mean? He said, you're going to come to Toastmasters with me Tuesday morning, 6:30, Brad's Coffee Shop, right across from ASU. And we're going to teach you how to speak. And he walked out. So I went to Toastmasters that following time, and it was now March 6th. Let's see, it was September. That was so must have been a week, like the 10th of something of September in 1969. And I went to the Tempe Toastmasters in Arizona, and I knew this would help me. And I joined. And that was the next domino. And if you think of the introduction that Matt shared with you, he gave you a quote from Warren Buffett, the greatest investor of all time in modern age and one of the wealthiest men in the world. And he said, you can increase your value by 50% if you learn speaking and communication skills. And that's what happened at Toastmasters. So I went for 5 years before I entered a speech contest. And in 1974, Matt, I had the courage to speak in front of women because Toastmasters was only men in those days. And women had their own group called Toastmistresses. But we had to do a contest in front of the wives of our members. And I told Judy, I said, I don't think I could talk in front of the women. She said, you're doing really good at Toastmasters. You would win in your club. I did. And I went to the World's Finals in 1974 out of 60,000 members, found myself on the stage at the Disneyland Hotel in front of 2,000 Toastmasters and placed top 3 in the world. And that was the next domino. It was written up in the Arizona Republic, our big newspaper in Phoenix. A young man places in the top 3 in the world out of 60,000 competitors. And the phone rings. So just imagine that was you as you're listening. You overcome your fear. You've learned some skills. You place in this competition. And then a guy calls you and says they're looking for a speaker. And his name was Paul Cronin. I can never forget him. And he said, I read about you in the paper. We need a speaker for our meeting coming up. Would you be our guest speaker? Now, what would you have said? Would you have said yes or no? I said, sure. He said, we got a chicken dinner. And he gave me the time and place. I said, that's great. Then he said, now, Joel, we need to talk about money. And I said, how much? He said, how does $25 sound? And I said, I guess that's okay. Where do I mail the check to? And he says, Joel, no, you get $25. I said, I get $25? He said, yes, we're going to pay you to speak. And Matt, you're laughing. Well, I didn't know what he was talking about. And sure enough, he gave me a check for $25. And that was in 1974. And now, as you read in the introduction, I've been paid to speak at over 3,000 events. I mean, my keynote speaking fee now is $25,000. So from $25 to $25,000. And in over 50 years of doing this, with no agents, no salespeople, no advertising, strictly word of mouth and referrals. That's it. I built this wonderful life filled with riches, family riches, spiritual riches, financial riches, just like your title says. You can have it all, but you've got to learn the skills. You have to have a system to help you. You have to read the books. You have to go to the seminars. You have to be around people like Earl Nightingale. And by the way, he became a good friend. The last 3 years, he moved to Scottsdale, and I took him fishing a lot. We spent a lot of one-on-one time together. And I'm still very close to his widow, Diana. Matter of fact, I just talked to her yesterday. So we're still close, even though he's been gone 35 years now.
Man,
so all of those things can happen in your life as you're listening to this. Listen to these podcasts. Listen to people who have been where you want to go. What did they do? So think about those things. If you had given the worst talk anybody had ever heard, do you think if there was some angel that would come down from heaven and said, by the way, Joel, when you go to that Toastmasters club, you're going to join, and then you're going to become one of the top speakers in the world. You're going to travel all over. They're going to pay you a lot of money, and you're going to do it for over 50 years. Do you think I could have believed any of that? But that's what happens. And that's what can happen to you. It's not a dream. It's not luck. Don't ever say good luck to you. What does luck have to do with it?
So, as we kind of start coming to the end here, what are some low hanging fruit things that if I'm an entrepreneur and I know I have to speak and I get really nervous and my knees shake and I don't know if I'm going to remember my lines, what are the top three things that you could give our listeners that would benefit them?
The first one is what happened when I learned how to sell World Book by thinking about how this can benefit the kids. So the first thing to think of, if you're uncomfortable, if you've rated yourself on that original scale that Matt started with as a 1 to 3 in the low range, it's because you're nervous. And the reason you're nervous is you're self-conscious. Self-conscious means you're thinking of you. What if you could get you out of the way, where what you're talking about is not about you? It's for your audience. So, Matt, when you talk about paramedic skills, how to stop bleeding and increase breathing when somebody's been hurt or injured, teaching these skills like you're going to do at our meeting coming up next week, that's about the audience. It's not about Matt. So that's the first suggestion. Get yourself out of the way. It's not about you. It's about them. Second thing is, you have to know what's important to your audience. Why would somebody be interested in this? So let's take Matt's presentation next Thursday or Friday, which would be a week from today. That presentation is going to be to high-level entrepreneurs where you're going to be someday that make a lot of money, many millions per year. And he's going to talk about breathing and blood. What does this have to do with them? It has everything to do with them. They have a family, they have activities, they're going to be places, they travel. The chances are that sometime in their life, they're going to run across somebody who needs help. And they're going to learn 3 things that can help them right away. That's why you never end a presentation saying thank you. And think of how many speakers you hear end it and say thank you, which means you've received something. You congratulate them, you challenge them, but you don't thank them. And Matt, when they clap for you next week, then you say, thank you. I'm glad you found those ideas helpful, that you can stop the bleeding and increase the breathing. Now go out and do it. But it's not about you. So those would be the suggestions to think about. Think about your audience and what they need here. Get yourself out of the way. And then one thing, if you go back and listen to this podcast again, notice how I made everything about you. I put you in the story. Come in my Volkswagen and watch as we pull that rear view mirror down and see the crack in it. You were there. That's what you want to do. Put your audience in. Nobody wants to say, I'm wonderful. Now you tell me how wonderful I am. No. Now, I used a personal story. I had to use I and me because it did happen to me. But it wasn't for me. It was for your benefit as a listener, as an entrepreneur, as wanting to be a rich entrepreneur in all those facets. So those are the suggestions that could be helpful for you. What else, Matt?
That's really great. I think that kind of knowledge is going to resonate with a lot of people. So thank you for that. What haven't I asked you that I should have asked you?
What haven't you asked me? What makes a great speaker?
What makes a great speaker?
Results. We've talked to your listeners about the talk you and I are working on at Genius Network next week. And you know that as a listener, the theme is, how do you stop the bleeding and how do you help somebody breathe? How do we know this is going to be a great talk? First of all, what if everybody that heard that went home and told their loved ones what they just learned?
That'd
That's
be
the
great.
result. What if somebody in that audience runs across somebody who needs help, and instead of calling 911, which everybody else surrounding that person is doing, they took action and used the tourniquet the correct way, or did the chest pressing the right way because of what Matt said? That's what makes a great talk. What makes a great speaker isn't their charisma, their ability to tell stories or use humor. It's what will your audience do after you talk to them. If you're talking about investing in your business and you're looking for seed money for something, How many people give you money? So everything is based on results, in my opinion. You can be dull, boring, and monotone. And if you've ever listened to Warren Buffett, he's not a Tony Robbins. But people by the tens of thousands hear him every year giving his annual address for Berkshire Hathaway because what he says is so powerful. And he's in his 90s now. So it's results. So that's one thing I think that would be helpful.
Okay, that's great. If people want to connect with you and learn more about you, how do they connect with you? Or
my website is ultimatespeaker.com. And we have a lot of tools on speaking that have captured all the things I've developed in these over 50 years of speaking and have coached so many speakers, very successful speakers, and very beginning speakers of all kinds. So there's a lot of tools that are available, and you can check them out there. And if you're serious about wanting to be an even better speaker, you can get on my calendar and you and I can talk. And I love doing that if that's going to help you be an even better speaker. So when it comes to speaking, since you asked me about some of these tips, the first one is it's not about you. The second thing is knowing about your audience. And because Matt's subject is so universally appropriate to anybody that's a human being, that's not always true. So if you have a product or service, make sure you spend time thinking about who is this designed for? Who is your ideal avatar, your ideal prospect? That's who you talk to. And the purpose of doing that is to attract the right people and repel the wrong people. So if you're selling something, we'll call it a widget, that old expression, whatever a widget is, and the audience has a need for a widget, then that's very relevant. If they have no need for widgets ever, then why are you even there talking to them? It's not relevant to them. So you have to make sure that you're connecting with what the needs are of the people you're talking to, or their fears, or their concerns. And that's what Matt's doing when I don't know how to stop the blood. I don't know how to give CPR to somebody. This is going to be so helpful, and it will be.
Absolutely. As we wrap up, Joel, is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, if I was to sum up everything I've learned about how to be an effective communicator and speaker, it's in these 22 words. So as you're listening, think of these 22 words. Speak to your audience about what they need in an organized way they can follow, and get yourself out of the way. That's it. And if you do that, imagine the next time you get up in front of an audience, you feel relaxed and confident. You've gotten yourself out of the way. You've created a message that meets their needs and overcomes their fears and reinforces their successes. And you've delivered it in an organized way. And you've added some humor or stories to make it even more interesting. And then when you get to the call to action, you get the results that you want. That's what's going to make you a great speaker. Matt?
Joel, I'm going to wrap up with saying, personally, I have benefited from knowing you and your speaking coaching skills. I have been an educator for 22 plus years, and you taught me more in 5 or 10 minutes than I had ever known. And you coach millionaires and billionaires, and everybody in the group says what a blessing you are. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your gifts. Want more? Click below for extra resources in our podcast vault. We have show summaries, action plans, and information about coaching.